Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I do one of my portrait illustrations. First off, I find a reference photo, which I still have in here. So this was my reference, and I just move it in the screen. Whoops. I start out with a sketch, so I'm going to hide all this. And for this stage, I just use a pencil, the 2B Grainy 1 or 2 by Sarah Faber. I adjusted mine slightly from hers, but I pretty much just use that brush. And then once I do like my initial sketch, I do another one on top of it, a little bit darker with more refined lines. And then on top of that, I do my final line art. And I do that also with the same brush. And then I choose my colors. I like using this Palette Perfect book, and typically I just flip through it and pick a palette at random. But for this one I used where is it? For this one I used this, and you can see the CMYK and RGB colors here so that you can directly put these colors in Procreate. And I just make a little swatch of them in the corner of my palette, or what do you call this, canvas? Yeah, my canvas. And typically I'll start out by picking the background, which, well, actually that's a lie, clearly based on my layers. I change this to Alpha Lock, and I select the darkest color, and I use the Max Packs Max U Gouache Clean brush for mainly the rest of this process. And I crank it up really big. Oops. I select the darkest color, and I change the lines to that. And you get this. And then I go in and select my background color. And for this one I did the orange, just to add in a bit of contrast. After that I fill in the entire shape. So that would be utilizing, I'm just gonna do a new layer, this color, and I'll just go in and, oops, I'll just fill it in completely and use a smaller brush to go around all of the edges, and then you get something that looks like this. And then next I'll go in with the pink, the dark pink, and I will do the hair and the shirt. And I set this layer to multiply so that the line work stays darker than everything else in the piece. And I'll go through and do Oops. Why won't it show up? I don't know why it does this. And I'll go through and color her hair. And you can see those lines are showing through because we have a multiply layer and they're not disappearing in the background. So I did her hair and her shirt. And then I did her shirt again just to make it a little bit darker and add a bit more interest. And next I move on to shadows. And for shadows I use the skin color again, which is this. And I set the layer to multiply. And I'm using that Maxi gouache brush again, and I'll just kind of paint in. Oops. So set it to multiply, and then I'll just lightly play with the opacity and put in those shadows. Like that. And I'll turn up the opacity and put the brush down for her lips. For her lips. And then I'll put the opacity down a bit, and I like to do the nose, and then like by the eye and her neck. I do it wherever I see a shadow that's in the reference photo. And then I use the eraser too to kind of soften edges. And then clean up where I want outside of the lines. And then you'll get something like that. So again, I'm doing all of this with that Maxi gouache brush. And then I do the upper lip one more time just because there's more shadow there. And then we'll go on to highlights. I think in this one I actually did the highlights first because of my layer names that I don't actually change, I just use the default. So for the highlights, using the lightest color. And I just go through and, oops, add highlights. And I usually go light and then darker and then light again to just kind of make them softer. I'll go through and do that with her hair, and I'll get something like this. Whoops. And then I'll go into my favorite part, which is the really, I don't know what you call them. They're more highlights. They're just not soft, so they're like harsh highlights, I guess. And I like to use the syrup brush to do the nose. Oops, that looks weird. Like, you know, something like that. And then I use the chalk brush and I do the little wispy hairs, which, whoa, that's really big. I can barely see that. And just kind of do lines that go kind of with the flow of her hair, or like make them go out so that it looks like stray hairs going wherever. And then you end up with something like this. And whoops, that is basically all I do, and that's my drawing. So thanks for watching. Bye.